This is the time of May. This is the time of spring. This is the time of Faery. By fairies, of course, I mean those nature spirits that dwell in the woods, or perhaps in the darkest corner of your home. Actually, they don't like us to call them fairy. They prefer us to call them the little folk, or the good neighbours, or the hidden folk. And I have heard a tale told that's all about the fairy world. It concerns a woman and her husband who needed some help around the home, so they went to their local hiring fair, and there they employed a young girl from out of the village who would come back and keep house for them for a reasonable wage. The girl was quiet and she was a good worker, and as was the custom, she worked most of the time but was allowed one evening to herself. On those particular evenings, the midwife noticed that the girl would return home with a wild and otherworldly look in her eyes, and she didn't seem quite herself. Curiosity got the better of the midwife, and she decided to follow her young servant. And she did so on one evening, and she was amazed as the servant girl entered this wood and began to dance. And she danced a wild dance, and it was as if she danced with someone else, as if she was held in someone's arms and swayed to magical music. But only the servant girl could hear that music, and only she could see the partner that she danced with. For as the midwife watched, it appeared that this girl was dancing and talking alone, only to herself, all in the middle of the wood. This went on for several weeks, and the midwife was very concerned about the girl, but didn't think it was her place to pry into her business and reveal that she had been spying on her. And then one day, out of the blue, the servant girl never returned to the midwife's home. She just vanished, and the midwife and her husband wondered what on earth had happened to their employee. Some 9 months later, it was a hot, sultry night, and there was a knock at the door, and the midwife went out and found a strange young man on the doorstep with a faraway look in his eyes. And he said to her, "Will you come with me? For my wife is giving birth, and I dearly need your assistance." She followed him as she put her cloak around her shoulders, and he took her over hill and dale to a faraway place where there was a cave. And as they stood by the cave, he put his hand against the wall of the cave, and a hidden door opened. The midwife was amazed as they entered the cave. It was meanly furnished, with a few rushes strewn upon the floor, and a young woman stretched out on a makeshift bed of straw and grass, and she was in the pains of labour. Quickly the midwife knelt down and helped the young girl deliver her child, and as she did so, she realised that the girl was the young serving girl who had been in her employment. She turned to look up at the strange gypsy man who had brought her to the cave, and he cradled his newborn son in his arms and said to the midwife, "I need you to help me put this ointment upon the child's eyes." And he gave her a pot of a strange, dark brown, sticky ointment. "It's very important," he said, "that you don't get any of this ointment on your own skin." So the midwife duly helped to apply this ointment to the baby's eyes. "He needs this," said the man, "so that he will see the world as it really is." The midwife thought all this was very strange. She now realised that the young girl who had worked for her had obviously become entangled with this young man and seemed happy enough to be there, for indeed the girl was filled with joy as she looked at her newborn son. Brushing away the hair from the side of her face, the midwife suddenly realised that she still had a trace of ointment upon her right hand, but it was too late. A bit of the ointment had touched her right eye. And as this happened, the cave was transformed. For now, when the midwife looked, she no longer saw a mean, black-walled cave with rushes on the floor and a makeshift grass and straw bed, and a young girl bedraggled and clothed almost in rags. No, she saw the cave as it really was. The bare black cave walls were covered in silks and satins, and the bed that the girl lay on was a velvet couch, not straw and grass. And the dress that the girl wore was beautiful and silken, and her hair was brushed and her eyes were bright, and she looked truly beautiful and wealthy, as did the man who stood next to her, proudly holding his son. The midwife realised that there was more to this than she had first thought. The young girl had not been mad. She had been entranced. She had now become part of the fairy realm. For the midwife could see from her right eye all this wonder, this beautiful home where this gorgeous couple lived with their richly clothed baby. And out of her left eye, she could still see the bare walls and the mean furnishings and clothing of those around her. "It's time for you to go now," said the young man. And he took the midwife to the entrance of the cave, and she felt that she should have remembered them journeying back to her home. But it all seemed to happen in the blink of an eye. 1 minute he was talking to her, telling her he would see her safely home, and the next moment she was back on the doorstep. And the farmer said, "Where have you been, woman? I've been worried about you." And all this time she thought she'd only been gone a few hours, but in fact she had been gone a whole week. It was 1 month later, and the farmer and his wife were walking to the local hiring fair to look for a new servant. And as she stood there, the midwife noticed a young man, dressed finely, a little way off, and she recognised him as the stranger, and she looked up at him to say hello. But that day, the fairy had made particular plans to keep himself especially invisible, and because she could see him, he realised that she had come into contact with some of that ointment. So as she said, "Good morning, sir, and how is your fine baby and your lady?" he smiled and he blew on her right eye, and in an instant the young man seemed to vanish, to become invisible, and the midwife saw no more of the fairy world.